I think you're ready to do it.
All right. Well, I see we've got Jeff Navin, our speaker, is on with us. Hey, Jeff, I don't know if you can see all of us, but welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. I guess this is actually going to be sort of our Q2 meeting, even though it's a little before the start of the second quarter. But thanks to everybody for joining. I did want to just recognize Scott, Authority Member Scott Koppel had let Brandy and I know that he had a conflict that came up today. So he's participating virtually, which is still consistent with the policy we adopted back when we started the in-person / virtual meetings. So I'll get things started just with a quick safety message. Despite the temperatures yesterday and today, we are getting into spring. We had a good, interesting internal safety message with our company last week, which was on ladder safety. I think as everybody starts doing more work outside and yard cleanup and things like that, we may be up on ladders. Just some reminders when you're doing that. Make sure you're putting the ladder on a stable surface. Don't be one of those YouTube videos that's got the ladder on top of a garbage can, on top of whatever. If you can, it's helpful to have someone who can actually spot you while you're up on the ladder to hold things stable, and then make sure you maintain 3 points of contact as you're going up the ladder to ensure you're safe. And then with that, I think we should go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves so that before we introduce Jeff, so he knows who all's in the room. So Tim, do you want to get started?
Thanks, Tom. I'm Tim Stuller from the Virginia Economic Development Partnership.
Jeff Fox.
Gene Graychick, representing the American Nuclear Society.
Ann Stoddard, Dominion Energy.
Frank Cronenberg with Office of the Attorney General. And use this quick opportunity to inform the authority that we'll have a new person sitting in this chair at your next meeting, leaving the OAG. Pleasure serving as authority counsel.
Tom DePonte with Framatome.
Energy Consortium.
Ken Ball, George Mason University. John Capps with the Virginia System. Corky, Virginia Department of Energy.
Harry Tepper, Virginia College. Bill Briscoe, George Washington University.
And then Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Scott Koppel, BWXT. Jeff, good to see you. Apologize all not being there in person. Just have a tight turnaround with kid activity later today. Just hard to get down back and forth from Richmond. Thanks, everyone.
I will suspend any other opening remarks and we'll get right into our guest speaker today. We are fortunate to have Jeff Navin, who's the Director of External Affairs for TerraPower. He's also one of the founders and currently a partner at Boundary Stone Partners, which is a government affairs and communications firm. Jeff's, I don't know, we met a few years back. He's been engaged in kind of the communications and advocacy for many of the advanced nuclear companies and become more heavily involved, as you can see, with TerraPower as they're moving their Natrium project forward. Jeff's held a number of positions within government, including Chief of Staff to the Department of Energy back with Secretary Chu. And has been honestly a leading voice in the advanced nuclear space. I asked Jeff to join us here today because TerraPower is really undertaking a really exciting project out in Wyoming. Not only are they one of the recipients of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program awards to deploy their Generation 4 molten salt reactor, the Natrium reactor, but also they're doing it in Wyoming at a former coal site. So in light of some of the discussion we're going to have later today about where Virginia is going to exploring some of those options, I thought it'd be great for Jeff to be able to share their perspective on kind of the coal to nuclear transition and how that's going. So with that, Jeff, we'll turn it over to you for as much time as you may consume, and then hopefully we'll have some great questions to discuss. So,
That's always a dangerous invitation to somebody who was in government for so long. We'll be here for 2 or 3 days if I go through everything. But thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and thank all of you for all of the work that you're doing in Virginia to reestablish nuclear power in the state. It's interesting. I've been working on these issues for a long time, and up until a few years ago, it seems like we were constantly having battles in the states, and there were always battles on defense. We were fighting to keep plants open. And now we've seen really in the last couple of years, a lot of states, looking to proactively update and change their laws to encourage the deployment of nuclear power. And I think that has something to do with the new technologies that are being available, and also kind of a long time coming recognition of the value that nuclear power plays on a grid. So as Tom mentioned, I'm the Director of External Affairs for TerraPower. TerraPower is an advanced nuclear company that was founded about 15 years ago. And it came out of a conversation that our chairman, Bill Gates, had with a bunch of energy experts. And he posed the question, is there a technology that we're going to need to solve the dual challenges of global energy poverty and climate change that is less likely to come to the market unless somebody in my position puts some money into trying to develop the technology? And they very quickly recognized that you're not going to solve those two challenges of the growing demand for electricity throughout the world and the need to do it in a carbon-free way without nuclear power. And then secondly, a recognition that with all of the advances that were happening in other technologies, we needed step change improvements in the technology that would both enhance the safety proposition, which is the most important way to actually reduce the cost and make the technology cost competitive. So we started looking at a whole host of advanced options, and you've heard probably a lot about them. We looked at molten salt, we looked at high temperature gas, we looked at thorium, we looked at just about everything that you could come up with, and settled on sodium cooled reactors as the best path forward for a whole host of reasons that I'll sort of mention some of them in a moment. And through that work, and we've been very fortunate as a startup company to have pretty solid and consistent financial backing that's led us to have many years to sort of develop and more fully bake our technology without the need to turn a profit very, very quickly. We recognize we're in a very unique position because of that. But it allowed us to take our time on some of these issues and kind of meet this moment, which we suspected was coming and finally has, in which the country and the markets are starting to recognize the need for the technologies. So we applied for the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, which is a 50-50 federal cost share program that was established by Congress in 2020. We were fortunate to win one of those awards. So there are two companies, TerraPower won one, X-Energy won the other. It requires us to deploy our reactor within 7 years of our signing the agreement, which would put us in a service date of 2028. It also requires us to find a utility partner who will own and operate the reactor. So it's called a demonstration project, but it really is a first-of-a-kind commercial reactor. The reactor will be licensed for 60 years, and obviously there's a potential for a life extension after that. We will own the project up until the time that we flip the switch on and connect the reactor to the grid, and it starts producing electricity. And at that point, it'll be taken over by Rocky Mountain Power, which is a subsidiary of Pacific Corp, which is part of the Berkshire Hathaway energy companies. Interestingly, Berkshire Hathaway, even though they're one of the largest utilities in the country, they don't have any nuclear. This will be their first nuclear plant. So I think that that's an important and interesting sign about sort of the demand, that this is not a very nuclear heavy utility who believes in nuclear, but this is a utility that's never been in nuclear, that's taking a new look at it. As Tom mentioned, part of the reason that Rocky Mountain Power was interested in partnering with us is Wyoming's a pretty unique energy state. I think they produce something like 17 times the amount of energy that they consume in the state. Most of it is for export. Most of that export goes west. Traditionally, it's been coal. It produces 3 times the amount of coal of West Virginia. It's been coal and oil and gas are very, very important parts of the Wyoming economy. But most of the customers in Pacific Corp's territory, or service territory, are on the west. It's Washington, Oregon, parts of California, and some of Utah as well. And many of those states have passed pretty aggressive clean energy laws, and they're no longer interested in purchasing that coal power from Wyoming. So what Pacific Corp's been doing is building a lot of wind in that state. They actually have there's a project under development right now in the sort of Wyoming-Montana border that is a 150,000 acre wind farm that they are proposing to build. And they're going to continue to build that wind because it's very, very low cost. But part of the problem is the wind. I'm told this. I've been spending a lot of time in Wyoming, and I'm told the wind stops blowing occasionally. I've never experienced it. But when that wind does stop blowing, they need something to backfill that piece. And part of the value proposition that we proposed with Natrium, I think, helps meet that need. They also have a commitment to keeping their employees employed in the places where they are shutting down these coal plants. So they have 4 coal plants that are slated to be decommissioned over the next number of years. We actually, before we picked our site, ran a little bit of a competition among those communities. And we said, we're not gonna put our plant anywhere where it's not wanted. We went out and did community meetings. We talked to the local officials. We talked to the workers themselves. And we had all 4 of the communities raise their hand and express interest. And it was a little odd for us to be on the end of a lobbying campaign where the communities were sending us presentations and calling us and trying to convince us that their community made the most sense. I don't think that I can recall a nuclear plant being sited this way, but it actually was really, really helpful to us because we now have a community that is very much enthusiastic about having this plant. We chose a community called Kemmerer in southwest Wyoming, in a rural part of the state, Lincoln County, Wyoming. The Naughton coal plant is slated to be retired. It's a town of 2,700 people. There's a coal mine right next to the coal plant itself. The mine and the plant are obviously the largest employers in the region. And the community had was facing a fairly serious existential crisis. When the coal plant would shut down, the coal mine would also shut down, and they would see pretty significant reduction in economic activity. So when we showed up, what we said is, we're going to have 2,000 to 2,500 construction workers at peak, which would almost double the size of the town for that period. There are 110 IBEW workers at the coal plant right now. When we are fully operational, we'll have between 200 and 250 full-time jobs. Pacific Corp has said that every one of those IBEW members at the coal plant will have a job at the nuclear plant. And nuclear, as many of you know, actually pays more than fossil fuels. It's the highest paying energy job. So our value proposition to the community is that we're going to show up with double the number of jobs that you currently have in the coal plant. Very likely will pay more than what they're receiving at the coal plant, and we're going to be able to have a plant that's going to run for 60 to 80 years. I mean, no economic development official could bring in any other employer that could have that level of certainty about the length of time that they're going to be able to provide those jobs. So after the announcement was made, when we selected Kemmerer, the water department actually sent out a survey with the water bill in the area, and they asked people if they were supportive. And that probably doesn't meet the American Association of Statistics rigor as an official poll, but they had 86% of the community said they were in favor of the project, and 8% said they were opposed to the project, with the remainder saying they were wanting to learn a little bit more. So it kind of flies in the face of this belief and this thing that's been out there about nuclear, saying, oh, you're never going to build these plants because nobody's going to want one in their backyard. What we found is when you actually give people choice in the matter beforehand, and they can weigh the pros and cons of the opportunities that are there, especially when you're doing it in energy communities, places that aren't afraid of having, big, scary looking things producing electricity. It's a pretty good value proposition, and hopefully that's a lesson that others can learn from. So the actual plant itself is going to be about 2 miles from the operating coal plant. those of you in Virginia who've been, around coal plants know they're pretty large facilities. There's coal ash facilities near it, and this particular plant has a mine that's associated, which still has active blasting going on. So we did move it down the road just a little bit, but we are going to be able to use the grid interconnect from that existing coal facility, which helps with our costs. We also have the existing water rights from the coal plant, which out in the west is a really big deal. So we'll use the water, we'll use the interconnect, and most importantly, we'll use the human resources of folks who know how to do this work. Now, Natrium is an advanced reactor, which means that it has some improvements over traditional reactors. I think all of you here know how traditional reactors work, and so I'll skip that part of the discussion. I can tell you the three major ways that the Natrium plant is different than the large light water reactors like those that are operating at Lake Anna. So first, instead of using water as a coolant, which every operating reactor in the United States uses, we use sodium. Sodium is a metal. It is, at room temperature right here, it's be a big block of metal. But at about a little less than 100 degrees Celsius, it melts into a liquid. And that liquid is what's going to be used to cool our reactor. One of the advantages of sodium as a coolant is that the boiling point of sodium is about 880 degrees Celsius. Our reactor operates at about 500 degrees Celsius. So we don't have to have the system pressurized, which puts a lot less strain on the components. And we also don't have to have the same kinds of external pumps to keep the coolant flowing over the reactor core. In a traditional light water reactor, the thing you're trying to avoid the most is that loss of coolant, that coolant boiling off of the reactor, causing the fuels to melt, down through the reactor container itself. And it's a lot of times those belts and suspenders, meaning those pumps, that water that you constantly have to flow over the reactor, that adds to the engineering cost. And it adds because you have to, it's such a catastrophic event if you lose that pressurized water flowing over the core. By using sodium, we don't have to worry about the coolant boiling off. So we can sit our fuel in a core and a pool of liquid sodium. We use natural convection and even air cooling to remove the heat in the event of a loss of power or an incident. If we lose power to the reactor will shut itself down. And it won't require any operator intervention, and it won't require power to be reestablished to improve the safety case. So that if you look at a schematic of our reactor design versus an AP1000 or one of the large light waters, ours looks very, very simplistic. And the reason it's so simple is because we don't have all those pipes, we don't have all those pumps, we don't have all those auxiliary cooling systems. We use the natural properties of the materials and the physics in order to make the design simpler. And simple with an enhanced safety case equals much lower cost, which is something that obviously our customers care a lot about. The second is the size of the reactor. Our reactor operating at base load power is about a 345 megawatt plant, as opposed to the more than a gigawatt, more than 1,000 megawatts of today's large light water reactors. And the reason that we did that is because we just see where the market is heading for utilities in the United States. And we don't think that there are a lot of utilities out there willing to make a many billion-dollar gamble on a first or second of a kind technology. It sits on a small footprint. Total size of our entire plant is about 44 acres. And nth of a kind cost for the reactor will be about $1 billion, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but that's the size of a check that a utility is used to writing. And it's the size of a check that we think in a regulated market, a public utility commission could be willing to consider, even after some of the less than great cost things we've seen in recent years from some of the large light water reactors. And then the third piece that makes our reactor unique and different from conventional reactors is that Every operating reactor in the United States uses the heat from the reactor to generate steam, and then uses the steam to spin a turbine and produce electricity. Ours is a little bit different. Instead of using the heat to directly make steam, we use the heat to run a large molten salt energy storage system. So we have the nuclear island where our reactor sits, and then a few hundred yards away, we'll have two big salt tanks. These are thermal salts that are really, really good at storing energy, and they've been used commercially around the world in concentrated solar thermal storage systems. It turns out that the heat from the temperature of our reactor, about 550 degrees, is the perfect temperature to power these molten salt energy storage systems. So we'll heat up the salt when electricity demand is low, and then we'll release that salt through a secondary loop that'll create steam and spin a turbine when demand is high. This allows us to store about 500 megawatts of electricity for up to 5.5 hours. That scale of energy storage is 4 times larger than the biggest lithium-ion battery storage system that currently exists in the world. That's the one Elon Musk built out in Australia. But what it means is we can run our plant at base load, and we can do that in a way that provides steady, constant power, just like today's nuclear plants. And we can do that carbon-free, of course. Or we can ramp up and down in grids like the one in Wyoming that have high penetrations of renewable energy. We can operate anywhere from 40 megawatts to 500 megawatts, and we can sustain that 500 megawatt level for up to 5.5 hours. Different configurations of the plant can be used. We could go longer storage with lower megawatts, or we could go higher megawatts with a shorter time duration. We chose this configuration because we think it makes the most sense for the market in which we're selling the reactor. So we've known for a long time that it's a lot easier to get to 100% clean energy grids if you include dispatchable power like nuclear, or firm power resources like nuclear. But we think the real secret sauce of our system is that we can do that in a way that also allows us to be flexible. So we really do get the best of both worlds. There's nothing on the market right now that allows you to do that. You can have steady, firm, 100, baseload power that's carbon free, or you can have intermittent power that you can't dispatch that's carbon free. But there isn't any carbon free source of energy that allows you to do both of those things, and we think that's going to be a key component and building block as states, utilities, and countries are looking to get to zero emissions. The challenges that we face, 7 years is warp speed for nuclear. We feel, however, like that timeline that was mandated by Congress is very much consistent with where the market's heading. We have to have these products available to be able to put into resource plans in the late 2020s, so that as countries, utilities, and states are moving towards these 100% clean energy goals, that advanced nuclear tools are something that they can consider and that are available to them. We have had very positive interactions with the NRC to date. We'll be submitting our construction license next year. This is the easy part of engagement with the NRC because we haven't asked them to actually do anything yet. Time will tell there. We're watching that process very closely. And then the biggest issue that has come up recently is that our reactor, like the X-Energy reactor and many of the Gen 4 designs, runs on high-assay low-enriched uranium, or HALEU. All of the current reactors in the nuclear fleet in the United States run on low-enriched uranium, which is uranium enriched below the 5% level. Ours is going to be running on HALEU, which is HALEU that's enriched between 5 and 20%. There is one commercial facility in the world that produces HALEU at commercial quantities. It is owned by Rosatom in Russia, which is a state-owned enterprise. So we, given the events in the Ukraine, have announced that we will not be using Russian HALEU in our reactor, but it requires the United States to stand up that enrichment capability, which is something that Congress and the DOE have been working on for a while. But the assumption was always that we'd be able to use the Russian HALEU for the first core load to remain on schedule while we're standing up that capacity. So we're working very hard with DOE and with the Congress to get support to expedite that process. so we can get the HALEU capability up in time for us to meet that first core load. But right now, that's a question mark, not a period, meaning we don't exactly know what that process is looking like. DOE is working through that. Congress is as well. It looks like there's going to be there's a bunch of money in it in the reconciliation package, but Lord knows what's going to happen with that. It was interesting that the White House, in their press release when they announced their budget yesterday, actually specifically listed HALEU as one of their priorities. So that's a good sign there, but still to be determined on that front. So, you know, and then of course we got to build the thing, right? So we've got to make sure that the reactor is built, that it's on time. I will, you know, we are partnering with GE Hitachi on the technology and reactor design. Bechtel, Virginia company, will be our lead EPC in building the reactor. By the end of this year, we will have 800 engineers working on the project. So we're ramping up and scaling very, very quickly. Perhaps I'll leave it there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about the technology, about the way we've gone about siting it, or the company, or anything else.
Great, thanks, Jeff. That was really informative. Questions? I know I've got some, but. So let me start, Jeff. This is Tom again. Question about Wyoming. So you talked about Rocky Mountain Power is not a nuclear utility. Pacific Corp isn't. They are, you know, have extensive fossil and renewable assets that they've been operating. And Wyoming has had experience with uranium mining, but not with the rest of kind of the nuclear fuel cycle. So what has it been like going to not only a customer, but a state to talk to them about nuclear energy, advanced nuclear, things that they're not necessarily familiar with? Like obviously here in Virginia, there's a great amount of familiarity. We've got this group sitting here that's focused solely on that. So what's that experience been like? Any tips on how you've approached these new communities and talked to them about nuclear, what their reception has been like?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing a lot of interest in the West, right? North Dakota updated their law. Montana's going through a process as well. There are no nuclear power plants in either of those states. You know, the other advanced reactor demonstration project winner in X Energy is going to be in Eastern Washington State. It's kind of everybody's kind of surrounding Idaho there, where there's obviously a lot of familiarity and more comfort with nuclear. I would say, you know, a couple things. One is Wyoming isn't particularly knowledgeable about nuclear, but they're very knowledgeable about energy, right? I mean, everybody there works for coal. It works for coal or oil or gas. I mean, it is a huge part of their economy. So they're very energy literate, even if they weren't particularly nuclear familiar with nuclear. The uranium piece actually is really helpful to us because historically it's been the coal mines. I'm sorry, the Coal Mining Association that has opposed nuclear power because they've seen it as a competition. But in Wyoming, the Wyoming Mining Association also has uranium miners in their leadership. So we actually have the coal industry group supporting this project because the mining companies and the miners see it as an opportunity for them to continue to increase uranium mining while coal mining has come down. So, you know, I think if you have gotten yourself comfortable living near a coal plant, it's actually not that hard to get people comfortable with the idea of having them live near a nuclear plant. But we've had to show up. We've had to spend a lot of time out there on the ground, meeting people face to face. You know, we are a Seattle, Washington-based company. We don't have a Wyoming footprint, so we have really had to spend. I've spent time out there. Our CEO has spent a lot of time out there. The project folks have spent a lot of time out there, meeting with people, doing town halls, answering questions. All the things that you would imagine, that you have to do. I will say that what we know is that if you live very near a nuclear power plant, you tend to be very favorable and comfortable with nuclear power because you probably have proactively asked your questions and gotten answers to it. But even in parts of the country where there are states that have nuclear power, you know, I'm always curious, and I ask people a lot. I live in Washington, D.C. We have the Calvert Cliffs plant, which is 30 miles away, and sort of ask them, what do you think the closest nuclear power plant is to you where you live here? And I say that to my neighbors, and you get these answers, oh, hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Nuclear kind of kept its head down a lot after 3 Mile Island, and we didn't go out and proactively talk a lot about what we do. So I think you're going to run into some of these same issues of having to win the public trust, even if you're in a state that does have nuclear power. I have no idea how many people in Arlington know that there's a couple of nuclear power plants in their state, and there's another one in Calvert Cliffs, not too far from them. But we've also tried to be very transparent. Every time we get a question from a reporter, we try to add it to the FAQ section of our website. So we have this really ridiculously long and boring FAQ site. But we kind of want to, just in the spirit of transparency, put as much out there as we can. So we've been talking a lot about fuel in the press in the last few weeks, and we're going to continue to go through that process with the governor, the legislature, the county, and the city the folks at the community level as well.
Yeah, this is April Wade. One quick question for you is, I know Wyoming passed legislation support of small modular reactors. Were you guys working with Wyoming at that point?
No, we were not. And there was a legislator there, David Miller, who just was really interested in nuclear and thought that it would be an interesting way to have the replacement. And they passed this law in 2019. And it was actually the passage of that law that caused Rocky Mountain Power and PacifiCorp to say, oh, well, maybe this is an option that we should explore. So it really is an honest to God example of a legislator that has an idea, passes a law, causes the utility to start thinking about nuclear as an option. The more they learn about it, the more they learn about our technology, the more excited they get. We did have to update that law. They had a definition of a small modular reactor, of a reactor under 300 megawatts. Ours is 345 megawatts. So we did have to go back to the legislature and make some adjustments and changes. But we were able to do that in this legislative session. And it was a short session this year, and we got that done. So I think when the history of this project is written, they're going to go back and that one legislator drafting this bill, that probably at the time people were scratching their heads saying, what are you talking about, small modular reactors? And a little over a year later, we had announced our plans to build our plant there. So maybe they'll name the plant after him.
Well, interesting fact, I have actually been to Kemper, Wyoming. I spent a spring break there because I have a friend there, and they like to be in the first JC Penney's was built there. So it's a great community.
Yeah, it is. It is the site of the first J.C. Penney's. Which is still open, and it's still run like a general store, but it is still a J.C. Penney's. But the community really was, when we called the mayor to tell him that we'd selected it, he almost broke down, because I think it had been a really long, this plant closure was announced a couple of years ago. I think it had been a really big strain on the community. They're trying to figure out how do you replace your largest employer? How do you replace those jobs? How do you keep kids in your schools? And now we've presented them with a whole host of other problems, which is, where are you going to put all these people that are going to be moving in the next few years? And we're talking to them about getting support from the interagency working group on coal communities to do things like make sure that their wastewater systems can deal with the influx of people, but also really encouraging the community to say, how can you make yourself an attractive place for some of these construction workers, to decide they want to stay here permanently and move their families there. So they went from dealing with one set of problems to a totally different set of problems, but the second set, I think, are much more exciting issues to work on for them. But it is a small town. It's 2,700 people.
Hey Jeff, Scott Koppel here. I'm curious, can you just talk about a little how the cost share aspect is working? Not so much the dollars, but obviously this is, there's a lot of resources needed and how from a public-private partnership standpoint. So thinking about it maybe from a Virginia's perspective from the state and working with the developer that's got the sort of the backing of the federal government and Congress and some sort of cost share model like you guys are working through.
Yeah, so the vision of ARDP is that for every dollar that we put in, the federal government will match. It's capped at the agreed upon price. We were able. The other thing that's great about this past year is we were able to get the bulk of that money for the total 7 years of the project appropriated through the infrastructure bill. So most of the money we need has already been appropriated and allocated, and it's sitting in a bank account. So we write a check for something, we submit that receipt to DOE, and they actually have been very, very good about turning that around pretty quickly. Now, in our particular project, we're not asking the state for anything, and we're not asking the ratepayers to absorb any risk of cost overruns or construction delay costs. That all falls on TerraPower, right? We are the developer in this particular case, and we will sell the plant to Rocky Mountain Power at a set cost, and that we've negotiated with them that fairly represents the value of that plant. So if we can't deliver a functioning plant, they don't pay, and they only have to pay that agreed upon price once the plant is operational. So that really does reduce the risk to the state, and it reduces the risks to the ratepayers. Now, going forward, we're not going to have a federal cost share for every one of our plants. So what that model looks like, we're still trying to figure that out. But we just don't think there's a lot of appetite until we can prove that we can build these things on time and on budget. There's not a lot of appetite to shift that risk over to either taxpayers or ratepayers. And the onus is really on us as an industry to show that we can deliver. Once we've built 5 or 6 of these things, and we are pretty confident we can do it on a certain time frame and at a certain cost, then maybe those things change a little bit. But the state has been supportive in ensuring that the governor, the legislature have been very, very big public supporters, helping us, ensure that we're in front of the right audiences, answering questions, talking about the benefits of the project. We've got to get, state permits for, environmental permits, water permits, all of those things. And they've been very, very supportive on that front as well. But especially for this first of a kind plant, we wanted to be very clear that we're not asking the state for money, and we've got taxpayer money. We've already got 50% of this thing with taxpayer money. So we wanted to be clear we're not asking the state to take any additional risk or the ratepayers. And for us, this is a make or break moment for the company. If we can build this thing and show that it works, show that we can deliver it, do it in a cost-effective way, then I think that we've got a great future. If we can't do that, then things look much murkier. So we really are focused on getting this first one right. And these are hard things. And Scott, this, we've got to, just the front end of the fuel cycle alone, right? We don't have access to HALEU. We've got to work to try to stand up that entire industry and make sure that there's congressional support and the like. We've got to come up with a fuel fabrication facility. We've got to get those fuels qualified. There's a lot that goes, just on the fuel side, there's a lot that we have to do. We've got to do the same thing on the reactor side, the same thing on the integrating the energy island and the nuclear island. So there's a lot a lot of balls in the air sort of simultaneously. But we've tried to do this in a way that at least we recognize that we need a social license to build this thing in Wyoming, and we wanted to put as little burden on them as possible.
Jeff, I've got one more question. You mentioned Bechtel is on the team. I assume their role is they're managing the construction side of the project. Can you talk a little bit about the planning or the challenge on actually the construction labor side. One of the things we've talked a lot about is how do we prepare a workforce to actually be able to build and even do some of the, license renewal activities that the existing fleet is undertaking. Are there synergies with, the Vogel project construction or some of the workforce there that can be transferred to you all? How are you handling that?
Yeah, and Bechtel obviously knows that workforce really, really well. So we are hoping that we can build, our construction timeline is as they're getting ready to turn those reactors on, we'll be ready to start some of our construction process. So we are hopeful that we can get some of those employees. Regionally, there's a lot of oil and gas activity up there as well, on some of those skills, will transfer. Initially, we heard some concerns from some of the local folks saying, are you going to hire local people or are you going to bring everybody from out of state? And I said, I really don't think our problem is going to be that we have too many workers. Like, we're going to be, anybody who's qualified that wants to work on this plan is going to have a good shot at getting that job, because in addition to this project, which was funded during the infrastructure project, there's $1 trillion of other infrastructure stuff out there. So that's a lot of the same kind of labor that we're going to need, highly skilled trades, people with that can weld, can pour concrete, can do heavy construction and the like. So it's a big concern. We've also engaged with the building trades unions as well. It's a little politically fraught. I mean, Wyoming is not the most union-friendly state in the world, but we've made clear we're going to need lots of union labor, because a lot of this stuff is very specialized, and we're going to need a lot of non-union labor as well, because there's not 2,700 skilled tradesmen just sitting in Kemmerer waiting for us to call them. So it gives us a little bit of we're heartened a little bit, because Bechtel is very, very good at this. They know how to pull these big projects together, but we're actively working through that construction schedule right now. But yeah, it's going to be a challenge.
Any other questions? Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We may have you back in another, year or two to get an update. This is really interesting, and I'm sure, Scott or myself or others may pick your brain as we start moving forward in Virginia as well. So thanks again.
That would be great, and thanks to all of you for all of the work that you do. I know, like I said, we wouldn't be building this project in Wyoming except for the fact that we had a few local leaders who decided that they wanted to see nuclear power, and they pushed for a bill, and they got that bill enacted. And very, very, very shortly after that, the discussion started on this project. And we would love to replicate what we did there in Virginia. It's a lot easier commute for me to get to Virginia than to get to Wyoming. So I'm a little, just not from that selfish point of view, but really thanks for all the work that you guys are doing in the state. And if there's anything I can ever do to support you, just let me know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Right. So the next up is we've got an update from Virginia Energy. Larry, are you doing the update for Al?
Yeah. Thank you. Firstly, on the Virginia Energy Plan, last time, still in the planning phase, still expected to reflect on all of the above approaches, as they said, creation of renewable and versus there will be a lot of stakeholder and subject matter engagement. So this was plenty of opportunities.
Larry, just one note on that. Had a conversation with Al on yesterday. Do you know the woman who's been appointed to kind of run the energy plan? I'm forgetting her name.
That's right. So Chelsea Jenkins is our new deputy secretary at the Congress. So she just started last week, so we're not too priorities are, but she'll be the liaison for both the energy plan and overall for energy and economic.
And reason we bring that up is we may reach out to her about joining us for a meeting maybe in the third quarter. Talk a little bit more, especially as she gets her feet under her with everything she's looked at there.
Any other questions on the energy plan?
The other comment I was gonna make is from what I understood, we're talking to Alan, only won't be all of the above, but it also includes workforce as a.
I think for this. On the legislative side, we're one major piece of legislation. We're going to discuss it. That's HB 94. So that is a work group policies to advance small modular reactors from no. The only note I would have on that is that it is still within the governor's signature, but there's no indication that that will be. Other than that, there was not a lot of major legislation around energy in this session, at least not in the past. I think maybe the key takeaway would just be to say that the Clean Economy Act is still the primary framework for working within here in Virginia as we consider energy. For any
Questions for Larry? Okay, April.
So the proposal is going to be emailed to everyone this afternoon, for you all to review. It is, we've been looking at partnerships. I'm really excited to announce that Jefferson Labs has signed on as a partner for the hub. I think that's a really neat thing for us. You know, one of the questions we always ask when we go and talk to legislators and the executive branch is, where's Jefferson Labs? It's nice to say now that, you know, we have a relationship that we're working together, even though they're on this board. It's just, but it's a good conversation. We've talked to the director and the deputy director. We know what that's going to look like, but no, they want to continue conversations with universities, and I'm going to try to work on getting on board into VNECA as well, to hear what the companies have to say, to the projects that are going on here in Virginia, so they can see where they can participate more in. But I'm excited about that. I will be calling the working group back soon. I'm going to send out an email hopefully tonight or tomorrow, setting a date for the working group for getting your approval in the document. But if you all will review it when Brandy emails it to you, probably within a week, get me some changes back so I can get it to the writer. But it's, you know, it has taken us longer than expected, but I can honestly tell you, I think had conversations that needed to be had to get that. So we have reached out to Virginia State University, we talked to Hampton University as well. We have a couple more meetings that we're going to do with partners. So we announced those as it's done in the next couple of months. Group will be looking at what they need to do next on funding opportunities. So that's where I'm at there.
Yeah, so Brandy will email the next iteration of the draft. If we can plan on having comments back by mid next week, though.
No, I mean, the next one is going to. So as Larry mentioned, HB 894.
Yeah, everybody, you've got kind of a document that April prepared, just so I can follow.
Now, if you can get a little background that you look over the document, Delegate Kilgore bill, and we're very excited that he included small modular reactors over yesterday. You know, I think some of the things that Jeff said were right on, and I think Delegate Kilgore is very excited about small modular reactors. Excited about us getting started right away, even without the governor's signature, although we're 99.9% 100% sure the governor's going to sign this bill. So we feel pretty confident about moving forward. I think everyone knows that last fall we did a grant application for the Build Back Better for the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. And this kind of goes off of, it's from what that work we did on the grant. Believe that this is a great next step for us. So we have some things in place, and the working group that the bill calls for, I believe we already have in place as well. We'll add a few others. I have talked to Jefferson Labs. They do also want to sit into this conversation as well, which I'm again excited. But if you look at it, the document, it just goes over the history of where we're at, the bill, and then our objectives for the working group to look at. Please review and let me know if you think we missed anything. And then the strategies that we're going to look at. We're, you know, this is a big task, and I think we're probably going to have to work in stages and put a calendar together. If we want anything in the next legislature, we probably have to have something to Delegate Kilgore and a few others by November, at least October we probably. So we'll probably have to look at stages of how we want to do this. But I just want to do the work group will have to work on is the calendar. And then, you know, Kilgore would love to be at the kickoff meeting for the working group. Again, I think that shows that he has a lot of investment in what we're trying to do here. And as always, for VNECA to take on this project, we'll need the authority's approval to move forward.
So similar to, as you read the legislation here, and the, you know, kind of what was actually enacted, it does look to Virginia Energy and VNECA to kind of convene the stakeholder group, as we did with the hub and kind of the strategic plan. What April and I had talked about is we think, you know, the most efficient way to go about that, especially in light of, you know, the public disclosure and all those the rules for this body, is to actually empower VNEC to manage the process, to manage the working group, and then provide what we talked about is we'll have an update on this specific task every meeting we have. So, and then a, you know, final report that would be again reviewed, signed off, commented on throughout, and then sent to executive branch, the legislature, for their input there. But along the way, since this isn't really, it's a little different than say the hub or the strategic plan, there's actually a kind of due by date. I think one of the things we think is this could very well be a organic and ongoing process, which is good, that may evolve and could become a little bit of a working group that can take on different activities at various stages, depending on what the needs and how this may go. So while we don't have it, there's intentionally not a specific date for a report to be brought back to the authority. There will be portions that we will want to talk about and comment on, and there may be interim reports, but this very well could be an ongoing process, and I think we'll have more clarity as the working group gets stood up. So April's kind of outlined not only you know, some of the objectives and the work areas that were identified here. A lot of this is out of some of the discussions we had around the grant proposal for the Build Back Better grant, also come out of the legislation. And then there's also, you know, kind of who would be on the working group. So what I thought we could do is, if we're going to take a minute to look over the objectives, if you haven't already, and the working group members, and if there are other things we should be adding and thinking about here that we can represent to VNEC to look at, I think that would be useful. And then we can kind of talk about you know, the recommendation for the resolution.
Yeah.
I guess I just have one comment as the investor.
I know.
We're gonna need to, there's a lot of overlap in objectives for this group. Not have one set of deliverables here, another set.
Yes, we might aim for saying that. I totally agree. I think we are going to have to. And I will be honest. I did not, we did not. This came from some others that were working on grant application. We just want to continue that work, but we want to work closely with the beginning and make sure we're working together on that. And there isn't any overlap. We all can have a lot of this information that we need to deliver. But I want to do that we can do. The communities is looking at some of that. Just keep moving.
Sure, I think there's great opportunity for cooperation and synergy. The way that we do this, we don't just tell people.
Would it be beneficial? So April talked about, kind of a kickoff meeting for the working group. I think back to a lot of what kicked off the strategic plan was the VNECA Nuclear Summit. We had presentations on a lot of the different aspects of that, and it kind of helped inform and scope out some of that. At a kickoff meeting, would it be helpful for someone from Dominion to give a short presentation on here are the things we think about when we look at citing a new project, or is that?
I think that would be very useful. I think.
So being someone who has done some of this in the past, I will point out that, for example, the first couple of bullets that you have on here in terms of evaluating the site and evaluating the infrastructure for the site is not exactly simple, and it is not exactly low cost.
And I totally agree with you on that. And I know that we can't do that, but I do know that we could talk economic development partnership and some of the chambers of commerce and ask them if they have sites that already have some work on and help those conversations. Do I think we can hire somebody to do a lot of stuff? No. We're going to be at top level, like here, these are things that we can also when you start looking at this opportunities. I think we probably go deep into some areas, but some of the areas we're going to have to depend on Dominion's work.
I think the working with the whole structure is going to be very, very useful in terms of bringing the state together around the project, in terms of manpower development and things, but in terms of the physical identification of the requirements for a site and transmission capability and all of that kind of thing. That is so specialized that there's really not much benefit that would be gained by trying to dabble in that and say, oh, this looks like this.
Yeah, it's more of, that's the kind of thing that we have to do evaluation, and then how can we use the work group to additional work?
That's exactly right. And maybe it's also, maybe the working group's role could be helping identify some of the things that the state could help support too, right? So maybe it's, hey, is there some way that VEDP could be funded to do or site? I don't even think it's evaluation. I think it's identification, right? It's just here are places that, or outreach to communities like we heard Jeff talk about they did in Wyoming, right? Where you're gaining interest in, from localities, or it's things like workforce, right? These are the sectors of the workforce that are going to be needed if a project were to go forward. Is there ways we can start that pipeline now, right? We already have Virginia Energy Workforce Consortium that is looking at some of the broader energy workforce for the existing.
similar to Jeff, my experience on that the part of siding is just Rico building the arraignment Richmond facility in New Mexico. It was all about, you know, that community had a site. They kind of fought for it with another community, which the site was better. And if we can just help those conversations, I don't think we need help with local chambers, we need help with the economic development partnership to just help them think about it as well, right? They probably haven't really thought about this as much. I know Jason Altuve has learned a lot. He's ahead of the EDP, which I'm excited about. But I think having them put that hat on as well to see what potential.
I'm curious, you know, are there other states that are doing something similar to this?
Well, as far as I know, yeah, the only state that has our setup, it has an organization. I'm actually talking to Idaho. They're trying to set up an organization similar to what we're doing. State may have something now similar, but not quite.
So I would say there is a difference between what we're doing here in Virginia and what a lot of other states are doing. A lot of other states, there are some I would call more ad hoc. So Washington's a good example. They've got a group in the community in kind of eastern central Washington where the X-Energy demonstration project is planned for, that they're now trying to look at, okay, well, how do you get more of the infrastructure around? They honestly, like, that's where our fuel fabrication facility is. There's a lot of infrastructure that's already there. So it's trying to see how do you maintain some of that for the advanced nuclear space. You know, Tennessee's looked at some of this back. This was more around some of the reactor refurbishment with Watts Bar and Browns Ferry, and now I think that's transitioning into some of the work they're doing on SMRs. So there is a little bit. The Carolinas and Georgia did this back when the AP1000s were planned for those areas, but
Maryland has something. Theirs is they operate totally different than.
I don't know of any that are, let's call it, legislatively mandated, or not mandated, but driven like this right now. There's some legislation that's been out there that is voting, but not necessarily starting to look specifically like this.
Virginia is the only state, I believe. You know, when I had met Jeff months ago, and the first thing he said was, congratulations, you know, Virginia is on the right course, or getting notice on some of the things. One of the things about this document, I think there's no other state like Virginia. We should be looking at SMR and Jefferson Labs. I personally think it should, you know, be like this on the East Coast. It's all in the West, and as Jeff and others have pointed out, right down the road from the Department of Energy, a lot of good opportunities. And also looking at manufacturing as well, not just building, but manufacturing.
The whole entire infrastructure. There's an opportunity with this to do things that state here, others to great benefit, providing clean, safe, reliable energy, all the infrastructure that's towards that in the education. Through jobs, construction, jobs, and tax revenue. It's a huge opportunity.
And I pointed this out before, is this also we have to, you know, for exporting manufacturing, there's just, you look at everything and you think about it, it's just like check Virginia, we got it.
Virginia has the opportunity to be the clean energy East Coast in total for all the things that are happening, not just within the Commonwealth, but to your point, export and for clean energy projects up and down the East Coast and internationally. That's why I said that, the magnitude of this opportunity is.
And I think that actually, that's one thing we should, the list of what the work does need to be, maybe just you can scrub it a little bit as we go along. I'm not sure we had anything on here about export potential or what, I don't know at the shipyard if we were to start looking at, I know many years ago, there was a project to look at doing heavy components at Newport News and for both domestic and internet, what type of work might need to go on down there or policy to support that to be an export hub.
And I think on the objectives, if I put it in strategies, but looking at the economic impact, this is an economic opportunity for the state as well. And that we need to be looking at.
I don't know about you all, but I took a note because I hadn't heard this, I hadn't heard Jeff say this before, but the fact that their plant in Wyoming is going to be 2 times the employment, the permanent employment, not just the construction employment of the existing, coal generation, I think is something that is definitely something that would be useful for communities and people to understand. So that's, one of the things I think that is hard, and sometimes you hear fossil replacement power and you think renewables, and it's really useful, it's great, but it doesn't come with the same job footprint at all. So
I mean, it's an all of the above to have safe, reliable, affordable energy. It's a necessity, but if you look at solar farm, see when you drive by, and there are maintenance requirements and things that aren't going, so there is some employment. But I think the opportunity there, the opportunity to transition that site with all the benefits that provides, with a small modular reactor and the employment and the tax benefits of this reliable carbon-free energy. So I think that's a big opportunity.
And one other thing to mention, I think Tom mentioned this last time, Appalachian Law School is doing a study. I understand, I think it's on sites, and that's what Talia Kilburn. But he's setting up a call with that professor that's leading that charge. And I know we're looking at West Virginia and Virginia sites.
What about the working group members? Is there anyone? I actually made a note. I think Bechtel. I know we.
She's on my list.
I have to follow up with Colleen about Bechtel having someone rejoin VNECA here, but I was thinking from the workforce standpoint, that's going to be really something I think the construction workforce we should see if they.
Yes.
The working group.
I wrote that down today as well.
Anybody else we're missing from the working group? I know you had the labs.
The other thing I did is I reached out to NEI. They have sent me a package to look at some legislation that's gone on in other states that we can look at, see if there's anything that we think. I'll bring that to the work.
No disrespect to Dominion, but in the southwest part of the state, I may be involved.
Yes. Now they've spoken publicly in support of
Okay, are there other comments on kind of what April's laid out here? And then, at the end here, we kind of came up with a recommendation. But again, this is kind of empowering VNEC to manage the process, but also reporting back to us on a quarterly basis or more often through emails that Brandy can send to everybody. If any comments on? Can I get a motion to? Steve? A second? And we do a roll call, is that correct, Brandy?
Well, I just need who second.
What are we voting on?
The recommended resolution at the end of the, is to empower.
All right.
So, we'll start on the phone. Scott?
Yes, I'm for it.
Tim?
Aye.
Dean? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, so that's unanimous. Okay, so then if we want to take a moment, the minutes from last meeting are in your notes. They've also been posted. You can take a minute if folks have any changes or comments.
I was pointing.
Oh, is it not on there?
You're sitting next to me. I think.
Still.
Yeah, we missed that part of the room.
That's why I'm speaking up to them. And I remember coming here because I have a crack clean across my windshield from a rock that got kicked up on I-95 coming down.
All right, thanks. What happens when you correct the minutes?
Well, my defense, I didn't draft these.
Yeah, we can play with Eric. By the way,
Eric's first try.
yeah. Everybody's reference, Eric's no longer with us. He's taken a job with,
I'll list your name.
it's Ernie Moniz's think tank up in Tennessee. So you probably see him again at some point. Right, any other changes or? Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes as amended? Second,
Okay.
Bill? Scott? You approve the minutes? Yay. Okay.
Yay.
We can voice vote the rest of the group. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. And then the only other thing, before we can use a comment is got the asset inventory list. If you have any updates, would you provide those to Brandy? I review this every time. So keep that.
Yeah, and I might add on that asset, as it went from my hands to Eric's hand, I'm not sure if I have the official copy because there were several copies. So just make sure that everything that we talked about. Wait, no, you tell me to now.
So in terms of news, other reports, I don't have a whole lot. I think Jeff did highlight a pretty significant issue that's ongoing right now. Obviously with the terrible conflict that's going on in Ukraine, more practical near-term things for the industry is impact on fuel, both for the existing fleet and for advanced reactors. So that's something I know, sure, and you're following closely. But the big emphasis, I think, has been the highlight of domestic fuel cycle capabilities within not only the US, but really there's discussion now of how do we in terms of the kind of Western Alliance countries, make sure we're not reliant on Russian fuel. So there's increased discussion of how do you stand up additional conversion, enrichment, mining's less of an issue. And then when we get to the advanced nuclear, it's really a whole HALEU fuel cycle, which is capitalizing on a lot of technologies we already have, but it's going to take investment. So that's a pretty high-profile ongoing discussion. As Jeff said, it actually was in the president's release about the budget yesterday and securing HALEU supply, domestic HALEU supply. It's interesting, along with the fact that they have, looks like a plus up in the budget for fuel cycle R&D, which hopefully will. Yes, yeah, opportunities for Virginia. That's true.
Is it true that Virginia prohibits mining of uranium?
That is true. That's right now.
There's a moratorium.
There's a moratorium on it. The other thing is, you may have seen Dr. Katie Huff, was acting Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. She's made it through her confirmation hearing. She highlighted the issues with nuclear fuel and the emphasis on that for the department. I don't know, Scott, you may have an update on when she may actually get her confirmation vote, but it doesn't look like there's much of a hang up other than timing because it is the Senate. But Scott, if you have any other info.
No, I don't think she's been voted out of committee yet, because I don't think they've had a business meeting, but I agree with your assessment, at least at the committee level, there didn't seem to be any real issues or hangups. But you never know in this process in terms of issues that have absolutely nothing to do with you and a senator putting a hold on you, which can be done in secret, basically. It's basically akin to a filibuster, so.
Hopefully that will move quickly because they could use more leadership and just more people.
Yeah.
Anything else company-wise or other? So for that, we will move to public comment.
Get into cameras since David could not be here today. Erica Gray, I live in Richmond, and also Virginia's here. I want to start off with is yesterday marked the 43rd anniversary of 3 Mile Island accident, which one of the largest accidents in the United States that has so far. We'll maintain that not another one happened. It was due to a mechanical and human error. Unit 2 is currently that was shut down in 1979 for the accident. It's maintained in storage right now until I think when they finally closed down Unit 1, which looks like it's estimated to be in 2079. None of us will be here. See? When things go wrong, they go really wrong. It's really expensive. I don't even know what that cost is going to look like when they finally do, but that's going to be the weight of our children and grandchildren. I wanted to move also to the NPR, kind of demonstrate the thing that's going on in Ukraine. It's pretty horrific. Of course, this was on NPR March 14th. Last week's assault on Russian forces on the Zaporizhzhia, I can't say it, nuclear power plant was far more dangerous than initial assessments suggested. According to analysis by NPR, videos and photographs of the attack of the aftermath, a thorough review of a 4-hour, 21-minute security camera of the attacks reveals the Russian forces repeatedly fired heavy weapons into the direction of the plant's massive reactor buildings, which house dangerous nuclear fuel. Photos show that administrative buildings directly in front of the reactor company was shredded by Russian forces. And a video from inside the plant showed damage and possible Russian shells that landed less than 250 feet from reactor 2 building. If attacking the functioning plant wasn't insufficient, Russia has also taken over the site no longer operating Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident of 1986 spread radioactive materials throughout Europe. It was one of the largest nuclear catastrophes in history. There has even been reports of, because of all of the action and stuff that's going on there, that actually they can actually measure radioactive particles in the area. I'm not sure how. So that kind of goes to demonstrate that we never really know what's going to happen. I think they have like 15 reactors in that country. I don't know how many biolabs, but you know, this is a very dangerous situation. Nuclear, just by its nature, dangerous. It doesn't matter if it's from mining, milling, processing to the back end of forever waste storage. Yes, we have a ban on uranium mining, and Virginia's came out in force that we don't want it. And that facility that's down there by Chatham, Virginia, near the North Carolina border, people don't want that there, and they fought it really hard. Low-grade uranium. You have to dig up a whole bunch. I don't know how that's environmentally friendly, but so I want to mention that. Yes, there's obviously a problem with us relying on uranium. 20% from Russia, 30% from their allies, about 90% is already imported. So anyone living near, especially the Native American communities, you know, a lot of that stuff still hasn't been cleaned up. To do more of that, in the name of clean energy, it's just beyond my imagination how that's even clean at all. I did want to mention that, you know, I do think that we need to look at, and then from the engineer, the estimated cost of cleaning up the waste from 20th century nuclear power plants currently stands at $131 billion. Now that's more. What's more is this figure does not include construction of a geological depository. So, and that's the UK. Can't even imagine what ours would look like. So, this group always talks about moving forward with new, more new. Well, you know, we've got some huge, daunting tasks when it comes to the waste we already have. I think that's definitely a problem. And from Mr. Lyman, Dr. Lyman from the Union of Concerned Scientists report, basically if nuclear power is to play a larger role to address climate change, it's essential for new reactor designs to be safer, more secure, and pose comparable or better yet, lower risk of nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism than the existing fleet. He goes on to say, despite the hype surrounding them, none of the non-light water reactors on the drawing board we have reviewed meet all of those requirements. So he goes on basically, one of the proposed sodium cooled fast reactors, TerraPower's powers 345 megawatt Natrium has received considerable media attention because of Bill Gates. But basically, in fact, the U.S. report sodium cooled fast reactors such as Natrium would likely be less uranium efficient. They would not reduce the amount of waste that requires long-term isolation in a geologic repository. They also could experience safety problems that are not an issue for light water reactors. Sodium coolant, for example, can burn when exposed to air or water. A sodium cooled fast reactor could experience uncontrollable power increase that would result in a rapid or meltdown. So when it comes to safety and security, sodium cooled fast reactors and molten salt fuel reactors are significantly worse than conventional light water reactors, says Dr. Lyman. Kind of goes on to say, we've got a lot of hype going on here in this room about, we don't know. And the amount of money that's going to be needed and the amount of money that's been given from the government, for some of these grants is a drop in the bucket. So, I mean, all this hype about how exciting this is, exciting like in 20 years maybe. I mean, you might get some of these demonstration things going, but you know, nothing's proven. So, I mean, I think that's a far cry there to be really excited about it. The reality is renewables already exist, and I think Dominion knows this, Mr. Schotter knows this very well. I'd like to see, as a lot of Virginians would like to see, because we already have a lot of these things at hand, and why not move forward more with renewable energy? It doesn't require forever storage of nuclear waste. It's not dangerous, doesn't require this whole mining uranium everywhere. It's dirty and it's toxic. So, I mean, to me, the solution is more to kind of go with kind of where we're going already. And so I think that would make more sense. And I was going to say that I did notice who was listening. I'm not sure what April was mentioning when Mr. Schotter was asking about the different things that was written. She mentioned that she or y'all were not the ones that worked on that proposal. I'm just curious who did work on those proposals that y'all were talking back and forth. Something about there was not like, that you said something about that y'all didn't write that. So just wondering who's writing those proposals.
I'm not sure.
Y'all were going back and forth.
These were the grant proposal,
Well, who else was a part of it, I'm asking?
like everybody that's on the list. in the document.
I didn't get that document too, by the way. I'd like a copy. It was my next one of these here.
Yeah.
That's what that's good. And then also, please, on the asset list, as a citizen, as a mother and a grandmother, I would like to know what my children and grandchildren are going to be inherited. So as the asset list goes, please list our nuclear power plants, how much waste, nuclear waste, is stored and Haas on-site task for both facilities, but also how much nuclear waste is currently already sitting in the reactor cooling pools. Because if we're going to talk about assets, I don't know, maybe one day we'll figure out how to turn it into an asset, which sounds like that's always being talked about for the past 50 years. But the reality is that should be included. I don't want to hear just this asset list over here when there's no negatives over here on the other side. The negatives are, that's a problem. And I'm sure Dominion spends a lot of money putting this stuff into canisters. And they've re-racked the fueling pools already that store it. And these facilities are getting older. So, you know, who's going to be responsible for the waste? Obviously, every American is going to be held captive in this waste forever. I think we need to stop making it. Let's go forward with what we know. What's on the table right now is with renewables. We can do this. As it goes for the nuclear industry, you guys work on better canisters, because these canisters, the NRC has not said they would even last 100 years. These canisters are going to start to fail. Do something better than this. And the idea of some deep geological repository is probably not going to happen, because you can't just pop it in the ground thinking you can forget about it. We might be able to forget about it. What about the coming up generations? What kind of water problems are they going to have? I'd like to see more responsibility happen here instead of just more, because really what it is, it's a gravy train. Everybody's jumping on the gravy train. You know, it's a money grab. How much money can we make? Just like some of these big projects that failed. A lot of people got paid. The project never even came to fruition, but people made money. You know, I think we just need to look at moving forward with more renewables. And I hope Dominion really takes the stand on moving forward with clean, non-dangerous, threatening energy that doesn't create a waste product that lasts forever. Thank you.
All right, any other public comments?
Appreciate everybody's time, and the only other thing is, work with Randy to send out a noodle poll to set up, the third quarter meeting, probably, June, July time.
And please look at,
Sorry, hold on. We have one more. David, you had a comment? I see your hands raised.
You,
You're on mute, David.
so I mean,
Still on mute. I think it's the other one, Randy. This is audio. Can you unmute that?
It looks to be unmuted.
Yeah. Try again, David. I think we're.
can't read it though.
Oh, wait, it looks like he can't.
he disappeared.
Sign back in.
Second, see if we decide second. But yeah, we'll send out a doodle poll for the Q3 meeting, and we do have, I was going to say, there's 2 vacant seats. One was Colleen Deegan, who stepped down from Bechtel, but I'm going to follow up with her. She was going to see about a replacement. I think it'd be useful to have that. And the other is from Virginia Tech, so we're going to reach out to.
I'll talk to him. I didn't call him today.
About,
No, we can't see you or hear you up there. Okay, well, do you want to say something? I can put you up here on my phone. All right, well, I had you on speaker, so you sure you don't want to say anything? Okay, all right, bye. There you go.
there we go. Thank you. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
It's great.
Sure. Good job. I wanted to say we also read, one of the energy experts. We're told it's pretty cute. So we're gonna wrap up with that. To me, it's a lot safer. It doesn't create waste products forever. Just saying. Excuse me.
We have a lot of kids.
Right.